You don't get to sit here, old man. Stand up and move before we drag you out. Deputy Pike's voice cut through the diner, loud enough that every fork paused. Calvin Rhodes didn't look away from his coffee. He lifted his eyes, calm and steady. "I've paid for my seat," he said quietly. Pike let out a humorless laugh and stepped closer, planting his hand on the counter from Calvin's cup. "You think that matters?" he muttered, leaning in like the answer was decided. Around them, people shifted in their seats, careful to get involved, until Pike's hand snapped forward and sent Calvin's coffee cup crashing to the floor, ceramic shattering across the tile. His hand slipped into his coat pocket, fingers closing around his phone. Pike shook his head, dismissing him. Call whoever you want. He had no idea that this was the last moment things would ever feel that simple. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. Early evening light slanted through the windows of Maybelle's diner, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. The place sat on the edge of Briar County, a small roadside establishment that had served travelers and locals for nearly 30 years. At this hour, only a handful of customers occupied the red vinyl booths, the dinner rush still an hour away. Calvin Rhodes sat alone at the counter, his tall frame straight despite his 68 years. His brown coat was pressed and neat, much like the man himself. He cradled a white ceramic mug between his hands, the coffee inside growing cold as his thoughts drifted to the cemetery he'd visited earlier. 23 years his wife had been gone, but Tuesdays were still for bringing fresh flowers. Emily Dawson moved behind the counter with practiced ease, refilling coffee cups and taking orders. She noticed how Calvin winced slightly when he lifted his mug, the way his knuckles appeared swollen and bruised. Old injuries, she guessed, from years of service. She'd overheard him mention once to Maybelle that he'd been military before government work. Emily approached with the coffee pot. "Top you off, Mr. Rhodes?" she asked quietly. Calvin's weathered face softened. "Thank you, Miss Emily." She poured carefully, noting how he used both hands to steady the cup. A gesture of respect, not weakness. Emily had worked at Maybelle's for 3 years now, and in that time Calvin had never been anything but polite. He tipped well, spoke softly, and always thanked her by name. The bell above the door jangled harshly, breaking the diner's peaceful atmosphere. 2 sheriff's deputies strode in, uniforms crisp, but expressions sour. Deputy Nolan Pike led the way, a tall man with cold eyes and a permanent sneer. Behind him followed Deputy Brent Tully, younger and eager to please his superior. "Total waste of time," Pike announced to no one in particular, sliding onto a stool 3 spaces down from Calvin. 2 hours watching that highway? And nothing. Tully laughed nervously. "That tip was garbage. No drug runners coming through today." Maybelle Carter emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. In her 60s, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a practical bun, she'd owned the diner for almost 2 decades. "Evening, officers. The usual?" Pike nodded. Then his gaze settled on Calvin. Something in his expression shifted, hardened. He nudged Tully and jerked his chin toward Calvin. "Haven't seen you around much," Pike said, voice carrying deliberately across the counter. "Just passing through?" Calvin took a slow sip of his coffee before answering. "No, sir. I live about 20 minutes outside town." "That right?" Pike's chair squeaked as he swiveled to face Calvin directly. "Funny. Don't recall seeing you before." "I come in every Tuesday," Calvin replied evenly. "Have been for years now." Tully leaned forward. "What brings you all the way out to the edge of the county? Seems like a long drive just for coffee." Calvin's eyes remained steady, dignified. "I visit my wife's grave. Then I stop here." Emily moved to place menus in front of the deputies, trying to redirect their attention. "Today's special is meatloaf with—" "Not now." Pike cut her off without looking at her. His focus remained locked on Calvin. "How long you been sitting here, anyway?" "About 30 minutes," Calvin replied. He didn't lower his eyes or shrink under the scrutiny. Maybelle stood straighter behind the counter, her hands fidgeting with a dish rag. She'd seen this behavior before from Pike, targeting someone he decided didn't belong. But confronting officers wasn't good for business in a small town. "You got money to pay for that coffee you've been nursing all this time?" Pike asked, his voice growing louder. A few diners in the booths glanced over, then quickly looked away. Calvin reached slowly into his pocket and placed a $20 bill on the counter. "I always pay my bill, officer." Pike stood up and walked over, circling behind Calvin like a predator. "Pretty fancy coat for a coffee shop like this." Emily felt her heart quicken. The room had gone quiet except for the soft country music playing from the ancient jukebox. She caught Maybelle's eye, seeing the older woman's concern. "Officer Pike," Maybelle finally said, "how about that coffee? On the house today?" Pike ignored her. "I asked you a question, old man. What's with the fancy get-up? Coming from somewhere important?" "No, sir," Calvin said. "I believe in dressing respectfully when visiting my wife." Pike's face twisted. "You giving me attitude?" "No, sir. Just answering your question." The tension in the room thickened. Tully had stood up now, too, hovering nearby with an uncertain smile that didn't reach his eyes. Emily noticed how the few remaining customers were studiously avoiding looking in their direction, hunched over their plates. In one swift motion, Pike's hand shot out, striking Calvin's coffee cup. It flew off the counter and shattered against the floor, brown liquid splashing across the linoleum and up Calvin's pants leg. "Stand up," Pike ordered, his voice hard as nails. "Let's see some ID." Calvin looked down at the broken cup, then slowly back up at Pike. He made no move to stand. "I said, stand up!" Pike's voice boomed through the diner. "Or are you deaf as well as disrespectful?" What had been a quiet dinner had transformed into a public confrontation that held everyone in the room frozen in place. Coffee dripped from the counter edge, forming a dark puddle on the diner's scuffed linoleum floor. Calvin remained seated, his eyes fixed straight ahead. Not in defiance, but in careful calculation. That single moment of stillness was all Deputy Tully needed. "You deaf, old man?" Tully stepped forward, his hand already gripping his baton. "Officer gave you an order." Emily stood frozen by the kitchen doorway, a plate of apple pie trembling in her hand. Her eyes darted to Maybelle, who took one determined step forward. "Now, officers, there's no need for—" Maybelle's words died in her throat as Pike casually moved his hand to rest on his holstered weapon. The gesture wasn't subtle. It wasn't meant to be. "Stay out of police business, Maybelle," Pike warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Unless you want the health inspector making a special visit tomorrow." Calvin carefully placed both palms flat on the counter. "I'll stand," he said evenly. "There's no trouble here." But before he could push himself up, Pike grabbed the back of his collar. Too late for cooperation. With a violent jerk, he yanked Calvin backward off the stool. The older man's feet tangled, his body twisting awkwardly as he tried to catch himself. "Resisting!" Tully shouted, as if reading from a script they'd rehearsed. "He's resisting!" Calvin hadn't even touched them. His arms were outstretched, trying to regain balance, when Pike slammed him into the nearest table. Coffee cups and plates clattered to the floor. A family with young children scrambled from their booth, the mother scooping up her toddler. "On the ground!" Pike ordered, forcing Calvin's arm up behind his back at a painful angle. "On the ground now!" Calvin's knees hit the floor first, then his shoulder as they pushed him down. His body moved with the stiffness of age, joints that didn't bend as they once had, muscles that had lost their quick response strength. But even as they forced him face down onto the cold tile, something in his composure remained unbroken. "I'm not resisting," Calvin said, his voice steady despite being pressed to the floor. When Calvin instinctively moved his arm to protect his ribs, Pike's fist came down hard across his cheekbone. Blood immediately welled from a split in the skin. "Stop moving!" Pike shouted. Tully drove his knee into Calvin's back, grinding down between his shoulder blades. The sound that escaped Calvin's lips wasn't quite a cry, more like the involuntary release of air from lungs being crushed. A child screamed from across the diner. The noise pierced the horrible silence that had fallen over the other customers. Plates crashed to the floor as an elderly couple hurried toward the exit, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. Emily's hands shook so badly she nearly dropped her phone as she slid it onto the shelf beside the pie case, angling it toward the unfolding scene. She tapped the screen twice, starting the recording, then stepped back as if she'd merely been arranging desserts. "Please!" Maybelle's voice cracked as she moved toward them again. "He's a good customer. He's not doing anything wrong." Pike looked up at her, his face flushed with exertion and something darker, something that looked too much like enjoyment. "One more word, and I'll shut this dump down for code violations so fast your head will spin. You serving food with those dirty rags?" Maybelle's mouth snapped shut, her face pale with fear and rage. On the floor, Calvin's breathing had become labored, each inhale a shallow struggle. Blood trickled from his split cheek onto the white tile. His glasses lay broken a few feet away, one lens cracked clean through. Still, his eyes remained clear, focused. "My coat," he whispered, his voice barely audible over Tully's continued shouting. "My coat pocket, please!" Emily noticed his brown coat had fallen half under a nearby stool during the scuffle. With Pike and Tully focused on securing handcuffs that bit cruelly into Calvin's wrists, she edged toward it. "Don't you dare!" Pike snapped, catching her movement. But Calvin had managed to stretch one hand, still cuffed, toward his fallen coat. His fingers trembled with the effort, yet there was purpose in every movement. Somehow, despite the knee in his back and the blood on his face, he reached the pocket and extracted his phone. With remarkable steadiness, Calvin pressed one button, then another. The call connected instantly. "It's Rhodes," he said softly into the phone. "Briar County, Maybelle's diner. Nothing more, nothing less." Pike's face contorted with rage. He lunged forward, ripping the phone from Calvin's hand. "Who the hell you think you're calling?" Pike growled, staring at the screen before the call disconnected. "Your lawyer? Think that'll scare me?" Calvin said nothing, but the look in his eyes had changed. Not defeated, not afraid, just certain, as if he'd completed exactly what needed to be done. Pike held Calvin's phone high like a trophy, his face twisted in a sneer. The screen still glowed with the ended call as he examined it. Blood trickled from Calvin's temple onto the diner's white tile floor, forming a small puddle that grew with each passing second. The old man remained still, hands now cuffed behind his back, his breathing shallow but controlled. "Look at this, Tully," Pike laughed, waving the phone. "No password. Old people, I swear." From behind the register, Emily kept her phone recording, her heart hammering so hard she feared the officers might hear it. She'd angled it perfectly, capturing everything while appearing to simply stand frozen in fear. Her fingers gripped the edge of the counter until her knuckles turned white. Tully nudged Calvin's wooden cane with his boot, then kicked it across the floor where it clattered against the wall. "Who exactly did you think you were calling, old-timer? The president?" He barked out a laugh. "Your grandson? Your bingo buddies?" Before Pike had ripped the phone away, Calvin's voice had been steady, measured. Not the desperate plea of a man being assaulted, but the precise report of someone used to being heard. "This is Calvin Rhodes. It's happening now." That was all he'd managed before Pike ended the call. But something about those words, the way he'd said them, hung in the air like smoke. Pike scrolled through Calvin's recent calls, his smirk fading slightly. "Who's this WH office number?" "What? You got some Washington friend you think cares about you?" Calvin said nothing. His eyes remained fixed on Pike's face, unwavering. "I asked you a question." Pike's boot pressed down on Calvin's shoulder, grinding it against the hard floor. The police radio clipped to Pike's shoulder suddenly crackled to life. "Unit 47. Dispatch requesting immediate status update. Respond." Pike frowned, reaching for his radio. "Unit 47. Situation under control at Maybell's Diner. Got a suspect in custody." The radio crackled again. "Unit 47. Confirm nature of incident and full status of all persons involved. Sheriff wants details now." Tully's head jerked up. "What's going on? We didn't call this in yet." The radio continued, urgency in the dispatcher's voice. "All units be advised. Black government SUV spotted crossing county line on Highway 16. Plates match federal registry. Repeat, federal vehicle entering county limits." Pike's face drained of color. "What the hell?" Emily's eyes darted to Calvin, seeing him in a new light. Beneath his coat, partially revealed by the struggle, she noticed a small lapel pin she hadn't seen before. Nothing flashy, just a simple emblem that looked official. And on his wrist, half hidden by his sleeve, was an old military bracelet, worn smooth by decades. This wasn't just some elderly man passing through. Maybell had seen it too. She took a small step backward, her eyes widening with sudden understanding. "He's not," she started to whisper, but caught herself. Pike's radio continued to buzz with chatter, codes flying back and forth that made little sense to the diner patrons, but clearly unsettled both officers. Tully's confident swagger vanished, replaced by nervous energy as he paced in tight circles. "Shut that radio down," Pike snapped, lowering the volume. His eyes darted to the windows, then back to Calvin. Something had shifted. Fear replaced arrogance in his posture. But instead of backing down, Pike's face hardened with resolve. He grabbed Calvin by the collar, pulling him to a sitting position. "Listen up, everyone," Pike shouted to the diner. "What you just saw was this man assaulting an officer during a routine questioning. He became violent when asked for identification. The blatant lie hung in the air. A woman with her young daughter gasped audibly. "That's not what happened at all," Emily said, her voice shaking but determined. "He didn't do anything wrong." Pike turned toward her, eyes blazing. "You want to spend the night in a cell, too? Nobody leaves until statements are taken. And those statements better match what I just said." Tully grabbed Calvin's cane and jammed it against the counter. "Nobody saw nothing, understand? This old man attacked officers of the law, and we responded with appropriate force." Pike hauled Calvin to his feet with unnecessary roughness. The older man stumbled but somehow maintained his dignity, standing as straight as his injured body would allow. "Calvin Rhodes," Pike announced formally, though his voice trembled slightly. "You're under arrest for assaulting a police officer, resisting arrest, and disturbing the peace." He pocketed Calvin's phone, then shoved him toward the door. "Tully, get the car. We're taking him in now." As they moved toward the exit, Calvin's eyes met Emily's for just a moment. There was no fear there, no plea for help. Instead, she saw something that sent a chill down her spine. Absolute certainty, as if every moment of this horrible scene was unfolding exactly as he had expected. Outside Maybell's Diner, the patrol car's lights slashed through the evening darkness. Red and blue beams painted the small parking lot in frantic pulses, turning the ordinary scene into something sinister. The few remaining customers peered through the windows, their faces ghoulish in the colored light. Deputy Pike shoved Calvin against the side of the patrol car. The older man's body tensed with pain as his already injured ribs met cold metal. His wrists, locked in cuffs behind his back, were twisted at an angle that would hurt a man half his age. "Stand still!" Pike growled, patting Calvin down with unnecessary force. While the deputies focused on Calvin, Emily slipped quietly through the diner's side door. Her hands shook as she pulled her phone from her apron pocket and scrolled to find her cousin Marcus's number. The video she'd recorded showed everything: the unprovoked attack, Calvin's dignity, the officer's cruelty. 3 taps later, it was sent with a simple message. Save this. Police brutality at the diner. They're arresting him now. She tucked the phone back into her pocket and hurried around to the front of the building, slipping inside before anyone noticed she'd been gone. Pike glanced toward the diner windows, suddenly aware of how many eyes were watching. Too many witnesses. Too many people who'd seen what really happened. "Tully," Pike ordered, "get in there and grab the security recorder." "Now!" Tully nodded and jogged back into the diner, the door banging behind him. Inside, Maybelle stood with her arms crossed, her earlier fear replaced by simmering anger. "You have no right to touch my property," she said, as Tully headed straight for the small office behind the counter. "Police investigation," Tully answered without looking at her. He ducked into the cramped space where a small security system recorded footage from 4 cameras throughout the diner. Maybelle followed him, her voice rising. "You need a warrant for that." "We don't need anything," Tully snapped, yanking cords from the back of the small recorder. "This is evidence in an assault on officers." Emily had just stepped back inside, trying to look like she'd never left. She watched helplessly as Tully disconnected the system and stuffed the small hard drive into his pocket. "That's my property," Maybelle insisted, but her protest faltered as Tully turned to face her, towering over her small frame. "You want to go to jail too, old woman? For obstruction?" he asked, his voice low and threatening. Outside, Pike was rifling through Calvin's wallet. Calvin stood silently, his breathing shallow and careful. The kind of breathing someone does when each inhale sends pain shooting through cracked ribs. Blood had dried along his temple, and swelling distorted one side of his face. Yet somehow he maintained his composure, his eyes clear and focused. Pike pulled out a card from Calvin's wallet and froze. It wasn't a driver's license or credit card. It was a federal access card with security markings that Pike clearly recognized. For a brief moment, genuine fear flashed across Pike's face, before he masked it with more anger. "What the hell is this?" Pike demanded, waving the card in Calvin's face. "You think having friends in high places is gonna help you now?" Calvin said nothing, just held Pike's gaze with calm determination. Pike stepped away and pulled out his phone, dialing quickly. "Chief Shaw," he said when the call connected. "We've got a situation at Maybelle's diner." His voice lowered as he moved away from Calvin. "Yeah, some old guy causing trouble. Got aggressive when questioned. Had to restrain him." Pike glanced nervously at Calvin, then turned his back completely. "Listen, there might be some complications. He's got some kind of federal ID. Yeah. No, I think we need to move fast on this one. Clean it up before anyone from the state gets wind of it." The conversation continued for another minute, Pike nodding several times. "Understood. We'll book him now. Keep him isolated." When Pike returned, his confidence seemed restored. Chief Shaw had his back. They would process Calvin quickly, control the narrative, make the charges stick. Speed would save them from whatever complications that federal ID might bring. Tully emerged from the diner and gave Pike a thumbs up. The evidence was gone. The recorder secured. Their story would be the only official record now. "Let's go," Pike said, opening the back door of the patrol car. As they prepared to push Calvin inside, the diner door opened again. Emily stood framed in the doorway, her young face set with determination. Calvin turned his head, his battered face catching the harsh police lights. For a brief moment, their eyes locked. In that silent exchange, Calvin's message was clear. Don't back down. The truth matters. Then Pike shoved him into the back seat, slamming the door with enough force to rock the entire vehicle. The fluorescent lights of Bryan County Jail buzzed overhead, making Calvin's bruises look even worse against his dark skin. Pike kept a grip on Calvin's arm tighter than necessary as they moved through the booking area. Every few steps, he'd give a little shove, hoping for a reaction. Calvin gave him none. Desk Sergeant Arnett looked up from his computer, eyes widening slightly at Calvin's battered face. "Got ourselves a fighter," Pike announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Assaulted an officer at Maybell's diner. Resisted arrest. Nearly started a riot." Arnett's gaze moved from Calvin's injuries to Pike's unmarked face, then to Tully, who didn't have a scratch on him. His expression said everything his mouth didn't. "Need to process him," Pike continued. "Dangerous individual. Threatened federal connections." Calvin stood silently as Pike emptied his pockets onto the desk. When the federal access card slid out, Arnett picked it up, studying the security markings and restricted access codes. "This is," Arnett began. The door swung open and Chief Vernon Shaw entered, his uniform pressed perfectly, despite the late hour. His eyes went straight to the card in Arnett's hand. "Log that separately," Shaw ordered. "Not with the regular belongings." Arnett hesitated. "Sir, this is a federal credential. Protocol says—" "I know what protocol says," Shaw cut him off, "and I'm telling you to log it elsewhere. We don't need every rookie who walks through here seeing it." Calvin spoke for the first time since entering the station. His voice was steady, despite the pain evident in his shallow breathing. "That card identifies me as Calvin Rhodes, retired Army intelligence officer, current confidential advisor on veterans' civil protections." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "I've spent 35 years in service to this country, the last decade advising on civil rights violations against veterans." Shaw's face tightened. "Is that supposed to scare me, Mr. Rhodes?" "No," Calvin said simply. "It's just a fact, like the fact that your officers assaulted me without cause or provocation." "My officers responded to a belligerent suspect," Shaw countered. "Your officers targeted me the moment they walked in," Calvin replied, his eyes never wavering. "I was drinking coffee. Nothing more." Shaw stepped closer, looming over Calvin. "You mentioned making a call. Who exactly did you call, Mr. Rhodes? Some low-level assistant you met at a veterans function? This is Bryan County. You think anyone in Washington actually cares what happens in a diner out here?" Calvin met Shaw's gaze without flinching. "Powerful men often fail when they mistake age for weakness, Chief Shaw. I've seen it happen many times." Shaw's expression darkened. He turned to Arnett. "Process him. Regular cell. Medical assessment can wait until morning." "Sir," Arnett said quietly, "he's clearly injured. Protocol requires—" "Morning," Shaw repeated firmly. "I don't have staff to waste on someone who's just got a few bruises from resisting arrest." Back at Maybell's diner, Emily paced behind the counter. The last customers had left, and Maybell was wiping down tables with more force than necessary. "I sent the video to my cousin," Emily said, checking her phone again. "But the file's huge and our Wi-Fi cut out during all that chaos. It's still trying to upload." Maybell stopped cleaning. "Can you send it another way?" "I'm trying," Emily said, "but the signal out here is terrible. And what if they come back? They already took the security recorder." Maybell's weathered face hardened with resolve. She walked to the register and reached beneath it, pulling out a small key. "They took the recorder, but they missed this." "What is it?" Emily asked. "Backup system key. After we got robbed last year, my nephew installed a second recorder hidden under the floorboards in my office. Tully took the main one, but he doesn't know about the backup." Emily's eyes widened. "So we have everything? The whole thing?" "Everything," Maybell confirmed. "I've kept quiet in this town for 20 years. looked the other way when Pike and his buddies threw their weight around. Not anymore. She closed the key in Emily's palm. That man stood his ground with dignity while they beat him bloody. I'm standing with him. Emily's phone buzzed. A text message from her cousin. Video file corrupted during upload. Send again? This isn't working, Emily whispered. Easy now, Maybelle said automatically, then smiled. But I understand the feeling. We'll get this right, honey. They think they've buried what happened here, but they picked the wrong man and the wrong diner. Emily nodded, gripping the backup key tightly. Do you think his call will really help? To the White House? I don't know, Maybelle admitted, but I saw his eyes when they took him. That wasn't a man who makes empty threats. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky as storm clouds gathered. Back at the jail, Calvin Rhodes sat alone in his cell, pain radiating through his body with each breath, deliberately denied medical care by those sworn to uphold the law. The assault at the diner had become something far worse, a calculated institutional crime committed by an entire chain of command. Near midnight, the neon open sign at Maybelle's diner flickered off. The parking lot sat empty except for 3 cars: Maybelle's ancient Buick, Emily's battered Honda, and Luis Herrera's pickup truck. Emily pulled the blinds across the front windows, her fingers trembling slightly as she spotted a county cruiser idling across the street. Its headlights off, but interior lights casting a faint glow on the officer inside. They're watching us, she whispered. Maybelle locked the front door with a decisive click. Let them watch. We've got nothing to hide. Luis Herrera emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. The cook's dark eyes were wary, his movements careful as he peered through the blinds. That's Officer Reeves, he said quietly. Pike's cousin. He's bad news. Emily's stomach tightened. Do you think they know about the backup drive? No, Maybelle said firmly. Only my nephew and I knew about that. Come on. The 3 moved toward the back office, a cramped space filled with decades of paperwork and memories. Maybelle flipped on the desk lamp rather than the overhead light, casting long shadows across the room. Under the floorboards, she instructed, pointing to a worn spot beneath her desk. Luis, help me move this. Luis pushed the desk aside while Emily kept watch at the small office window. The cruiser hadn't moved. How long have you had this backup system? Emily asked. Maybelle knelt with difficulty, her knees protesting. Since that new police chief came in 3 years ago. Something about him never sat right with me. Started noticing how his officers treated certain folks who came through here. She pried up a loose floorboard, revealing a small, hollow space beneath. Found my delivery driver beaten up behind the dumpster one night after he argued with Pike about a parking ticket. Figured I might need eyes of my own someday. Luis whistled softly. Smart lady. Maybelle reached into the space and felt around until her fingers closed on something. Smart is surviving 40 years running a diner in a town where power doesn't like to be questioned. She pulled out a small metal box that had been tucked beneath an old recipe card file. Inside was a compact digital recorder. Emily took it carefully. How do we know it worked? Only one way to find out, Maybelle said, gesturing to the ancient computer on her desk. Luis kept watch while Emily connected the drive. The screen flickered to life, showing the diner from 4 different angles. She clicked through the footage until Calvin appeared at the counter, then fast-forwarded to the moment the deputies entered. It's all here, she whispered. Everything. The coffee, them shoving him down, the beating. Her voice broke as the screen showed Pike striking Calvin's face. That poor man. Luis leaned in. That's evidence they can't deny. Emily nodded, quickly copying the files to a flash drive she kept on her keychain. Then she opened her email and attached several still images showing the clearest moments of the assault. What are you doing? Luis asked nervously. "Sending these to Jasmine Torres at the Regional Herald," Emily replied, typing quickly. "She covered that protest in Millerton last year when nobody else would. She'll know what to do with this." "Be careful," Maybelle warned. "Once you send that—" "I know," Emily said, her finger hovering over the send button. "But if they're watching us, they might try to take our phones or computers. We need this somewhere else." She pressed send. "Done." Louise glanced nervously at the window. "The cruiser's still there." "Let's put everything back," Maybelle said, "and act normal when we leave." At the county jail, Calvin Rhodes sat hunched on a metal bench, each breath sending sharp pains through his ribs. The cell was cold, deliberately so, and they'd taken his coat. Blood had dried along his hairline, where Pike's hand had split the skin. Heavy footsteps approached, then stopped. Calvin didn't look up until he heard the soft clink of a cup against the bars. "Water," Sergeant Arnett said quietly, sliding a paper cup through the slot. "Should have some painkillers, too, but—" He trailed off, glancing nervously down the hall. Calvin took the cup with shaking hands. "Thank you." Arnett looked uncomfortable with the gratitude. "Chief's orders are no medical until morning. It's not right." Calvin sipped the water slowly. "Did anyone at the diner get hurt? After they took me?" The question seemed to surprise Arnett. "You're worrying about others when you're the one sitting in a cell?" "Please," Calvin said. "The young waitress, the owner. Were they safe?" Arnett hesitated. The waitress recorded it, on her phone. "Pike doesn't know, but Tully mentioned seeing her slip something into her apron." For the first time since his arrest, something like hope flickered in Calvin's eyes. "Good girl," he whispered. Across town, in an elegant study lined with law books, Chief Shaw stood uncomfortably before a large mahogany desk. Behind it sat Councilman Douglas Mercer, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the late hour, his tailored shirt still crisp. "You're telling me," Mercer said, his voice dangerously soft, "that your deputies beat a man with federal connections in front of a diner full of witnesses?" Shaw swallowed. "Pike says the man was resisting." "Don't insult me with lies," Mercer snapped. "This isn't just some brutality complaint that will disappear with the right pressure. If this man really has White House connections, everything we've built could unravel." Shaw understood the unspoken meaning. The selective enforcement zones, the kickbacks from construction contracts, the convenient arrests that cleared valuable properties for development. "I need this contained by sunrise," Mercer continued, his voice cold. "Every witness silenced, every piece of evidence gone. Make it happen, Vernon." Shaw nodded stiffly. "Yes, sir." Back at the diner, Emily was gathering her things when headlights swept across the back lot. They all froze as a county maintenance truck pulled up behind the building. "That's not regular maintenance," Louise whispered, peering through the blinds. "That's Hoffman. Works directly for the county commissioner." Emily clutched the flash drive in her pocket. "They're not waiting until morning. They've come to erase everything." The metallic scrape near the dumpster cut through the silence. Emily's heart jumped to her throat. She instinctively reached for the light switch, plunging the small office into darkness. Maybelle and Louise moved beside her at the window, their shoulders touching as they peered through the blinds. Two men in city maintenance jackets approached the electrical box mounted on the diner's exterior wall. Their movements were too deliberate, too confident for midnight repair work. "That's not right," Louise whispered. "Maintenance never comes after dark." Emily squinted through the blinds. One man carried a toolbox, the other a bulky duffel bag. The fluorescent security light above the back door cast harsh shadows across their faces. Louise sucked in a breath. "That's Johnny Farwell. He's not maintenance. He's the guy who handles Mercer's campaign events. Fixes problems for him." "What kind of problems?" Emily asked, though she already knew the answer. "The kind that disappear overnight," Louise replied. Maybelle's fingers dug into Emily's arm. They're not here to check wiring. They're here to make sure no one talks about what happened to Mr. Rhodes. The man Luis had identified as Farwell pried open the electrical panel, while the second man moved toward the rear entrance with the duffel. Emily felt her throat tighten. They're going to destroy everything. The flash drive, Maybelle whispered urgently. We need to get it out of here, now. Emily slipped off her left shoe and tucked the flash drive deep inside, beneath the insole. She put the shoe back on, wincing at how it pressed against her foot. Better uncomfortable than discovered. I'll create a distraction at the front, Maybelle said, straightening her apron. Luis, try to slow them down back here. Emily, you get that drive to someone who can help. But, Emily started. No time, Maybelle cut her off. Go out through the side door by the storage closet. It's the only one without a light over it. Maybelle moved toward the front of the diner, her steps surprisingly steady for a woman her age confronting danger. Luis grabbed the fire extinguisher from the wall. 3 minutes, he told Emily. Then run. Emily nodded and crouched behind the counter. From her position, she could see Farwell cutting into the security camera wires, methodically severing their connection to the backup system they didn't know was already emptied. The second man unzipped his duffel. The sharp smell of gasoline hit Emily's nostrils even from across the room. Her stomach lurched as he pulled out a plastic container and began pouring liquid along the back wall, focusing on the storage area where documents were kept. The bell above the front door jangled as Maybelle threw it open. What in God's name are you doing to my diner? Maybelle's voice boomed through the building. The distraction worked. Both men turned toward the front, the second hastily capping his container. Emily seized her chance. She scrambled on hands and knees toward the side door, pushed it open just enough to slip through, and eased it closed behind her. Outside, the night air felt electric against her skin. She darted between parked cars, keeping low. Behind her, she heard Maybelle's voice rising in righteous anger. I pay my taxes. I want to see a work order. You have no right to be on my property. Emily reached her car and fumbled for her keys. Relief flooded through her as she unlocked the door, then immediately evaporated when she rounded to the driver's side. Both rear tires were slashed, clean cuts that couldn't be anything but deliberate. No, 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 she whispered, spinning around to scan the parking lot. Whoever had done this might still be watching. Inside the diner, a sharp cry rang out, followed by the distinctive sound of the fire extinguisher. Luis was fighting the flames. Emily had no time to waste. She had to get the footage out. Decision made, she took off running across the dark parking lot toward Main Street. The all-night pharmacy was 3 blocks away. It had public Wi-Fi and people around, safety and witnesses. Her lungs burned as she ran, the flash drive uncomfortable in her shoe. This wasn't just about 2 violent cops anymore. The slashed tires, the attempted arson. This was organized, methodical. People with power were trying to bury what happened to Calvin Rhodes. They weren't cleaning up after a mistake. They were protecting something bigger, a system, a machine that had been running smoothly until Calvin Rhodes exposed its gears. Emily pushed herself harder, ignoring the stitch in her side. The pharmacy's bright lights beckoned in the distance. Cars occasionally passed, but she avoided the streetlights, sticking to shadows. Finally, breathless and sweating, she reached the pharmacy parking lot. She ducked into the store, nodding to the tired-looking cashier, and headed straight for the corner seating area near the pharmacy counter. Her fingers trembled as she pulled out her phone and retrieved the flash drive from her shoe. She plugged it in, connected to the Wi-Fi, and pulled up her email. She found the contact information for Dana Mercer, the investigative reporter known for breaking corruption stories at the regional paper. No relation to Councilman Douglas Mercer, and all the better for it. Dana had built her reputation on exposing exactly the kind of people trying to silence Calvin Rhodes tonight. Emily attached the video clip, added a brief explanation of what she'd witnessed, and hit send. The progress bar crawled across her screen, painfully slow. "Come on," she whispered, glancing nervously at the door. Finally, the message showed, "Delivered." Around 3 a.m., Calvin sat hunched in his cell, shirt stained with dark patches of dried blood. Every breath came shallow and painful, his ribs protesting each time his chest expanded. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the concrete floor. He hadn't slept, couldn't sleep, not just because of the pain, but because he knew what was happening beyond these walls. Across town, Emily huddled in her locked car outside the pharmacy, the engine off but keys ready in the ignition. She refreshed her phone screen for the 20th time, searching for any response from Dana Mercer. The parking lot was nearly empty at this hour, just an overnight pharmacist's car and a delivery truck. Every set of headlights that passed made her slouch lower in her seat. "Come on," she whispered to her phone. "Please answer." Back at the jail, Sergeant Arnett glanced at the wall clock, then down the empty corridor. The night shift was skeleton crew, just him and a rookie processing paperwork in the back office. Chief Shaw had left strict instructions. No calls, no visitors, no medical attention for the man in cell 3. Arnett had spent 23 years behind this desk. He'd looked the other way plenty of times before. But the federal ID, the calm dignity in Rhodes's eyes, this felt different. Wrong in ways he couldn't ignore. He made his decision. "Rhodes," Arnett said quietly, unlocking the cell door. "Come with me, quick and quiet." Calvin looked up, surprised but not showing it much. He rose slowly, one arm pressed against his ribcage. "Phone call," Arnett explained, leading him to the front desk. 5 minutes. That's all I can give you." Calvin nodded. "Thank you." Arnett pushed the desk phone toward him. "Make it count." Calvin's stiff fingers dialed a number from memory. Not 911, not a lawyer. Something more direct. After 3 rings, a sharp voice answered. "White House Operations. This is Marcus Reed." "Marcus, it's Calvin Rhodes." The voice on the other end changed instantly. "Calvin? Jesus, it's 3 a.m. What's... I need to report an incident." Calvin's voice was steady despite the pain. "Bryan County Sheriff's Department, Deputies Nolan Pike and Brent Tully. Physical assault at Maybell's Diner on Route 16. Police Chief Vernon Shaw is blocking medical attention and documentation. Are you injured? Facial lacerations, probable fractured ribs. Denied treatment for approximately 7 hours now. No dramatics, no emotional appeals. Just facts delivered with military precision. Location of detention? Bryan County Jail. Arraignment likely being expedited to prevent medical examination." Calvin paused, then added the crucial piece. "Marcus, they're moving too fast. Destroying evidence, intimidating witnesses. This isn't just covering for 2 violent deputies. They're protecting something larger." Marcus's typing could be heard through the phone. "I'm alerting federal monitors now. Justice Department will have eyes on this by morning. Hang tight, Calvin." "Thank you." Calvin hung up and nodded to Arnett, who quickly led him back to his cell. "Who'd you call?" Arnett asked. "Someone who remembers what the law is supposed to mean," Calvin replied. Across town, Emily's phone finally lit up with an incoming call. Unknown number. She answered immediately. "Emily Dawson? This is Dana Mercer." Emily's relief made her voice crack. "You got my email? The video?" "I got it. It's..." Dana paused. "It's explosive. Absolutely unambiguous police brutality. We can run it on the morning broadcast." Emily clutched the phone tighter. "So you'll help? You'll tell people what they did to him?" "Yes, but I need one more thing. Another witness statement. Your video is powerful, but the station lawyers are worried about backlash. A second on-record source would bulletproof us against legal pressure. Emily bit her lip. I'll testify, but… No, not you. You're too vulnerable right now. Is there someone else? Someone they can't easily dismiss? Emily thought immediately of Maybelle. Respected business owner, 30 years in the community, even served on the Chamber of Commerce. I'll call you right back, Emily said. 20 minutes later, after a tense conversation in Maybelle's kitchen, Emily called Dana again. Maybelle Carter will go on record. She owns the diner. She saw everything. Dana's voice brightened. Perfect. I'm heading to the station now. This will lead the 6 a.m. broadcast. Maybelle sat at her kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea. My daddy opened that diner in 1963. Been through everything from integration to recession. If they burn it down for telling the truth, so be it. Emily squeezed her hand. Thank you. Just as the first hints of dawn colored the eastern sky, Police Chief Vernon Shaw's emergency phone line rang. He answered with sleep-thick irritation. This better be important. Chief, it's Pike. Channel 8 News just teased their morning broadcast. They've got video of the diner incident. Clear footage. They're running it at 6. Shaw sat bolt upright, sleep forgotten. What? How the hell? The waitress must have recorded it. They've got Maybelle Carter giving a statement, too. Shaw's face flushed dark red. His hand tightened on the phone until his knuckles whitened. Get to the station. Now. Call Mercer. Tell him media has the footage. He slammed the phone down, panic cracking the confident facade he'd maintained all night. Things were unraveling faster than he could tie them back together. At the jail, the first rays of sunlight streaked through the high window of Calvin's cell. He heard multiple sets of footsteps approaching. Heavy, purposeful. The cell door swung open. 2 deputies he hadn't seen before stood there with Shaw behind them. On your feet, Rhodes, Shaw ordered. Time for arraignment. I need medical attention first, Calvin stated calmly. Shaw smiled coldly. Judge is waiting. Can't keep the court delayed for your comfort. As they pulled Calvin to his feet, across town, the Channel 8 production team gathered in the control room. Dana Mercer stood watching as technicians prepared the footage for broadcast, the timer counting down to 6 a.m. The sun rose over Bryan County, bringing light to shadows that had hidden too much for too long. Just after sunrise, Calvin Rhodes was led into the cramped county courtroom. His shoulders stooped under the weight of pain. One eye had swelled nearly shut, dark purple against his brown skin. Each step was careful, deliberate, betraying the pain in his ribs beneath the orange jumpsuit they'd forced him into. Despite his injuries, he carried himself with quiet dignity that seemed to fill the small space. The courtroom smelled of old wood and floor polish. Morning light slanted through dusty blinds, casting stripes across the worn floor. Only a handful of spectators occupied the hard wooden benches, mostly courthouse regulars and a few curious county employees who'd heard rumors. The door at the back creaked open. Emily and Maybelle slipped in, their faces drawn with exhaustion. They'd been up all night, moving between the damaged diner and the pharmacy parking lot, where Emily had finally managed to send the video. Dark circles rimmed Emily's eyes, but determination straightened her spine. Beside her, Maybelle clutched her purse with white knuckles, her gray hair hastily pinned up. On the prosecution side, Officers Pike and Tully sat in freshly pressed uniforms, not a wrinkle or spot to be seen. Pike's hair was neatly combed, his face clean-shaven, a stark contrast to the red-faced man who had dragged Calvin across the diner floor just hours earlier. Tully kept his eyes down, fidgeting with his hat in his lap. Chief Shaw occupied a bench directly behind them, arms crossed over his chest. He nodded slightly to Judge Morris as the proceedings began. Case number 22, CR 418, Bryan County versus Calvin Rhodes, the clerk announced in a bored voice. Charges are assault on a peace officer, resisting arrest, and disorderly conduct. Judge Morris peered over her glasses at Calvin. She'd been appointed after Councilman Mercer's campaign for judicial reform 3 years earlier. Everyone in the courthouse knew whose calls she took first. "How does the defendant plead?" she asked. Calvin's public defender, a young man with a rumpled suit and too many files, answered, "Not guilty, Your Honor." Pike stepped forward to testify, his voice steady and practiced. The suspect became hostile when we questioned him about loitering. When asked to leave the establishment, he became combative. "He struck me here," Pike touched his jaw, "before we were forced to restrain him." Tully nodded along, adding, "He was shouting threats, making other diners uncomfortable. The owner asked us to remove him." Maybelle stiffened in her seat, her mouth falling open at the blatant lie. Emily grabbed her hand to keep her quiet. From the back bench, Chief Shaw spoke up. "Your Honor, these are decorated officers with spotless records. This kind of assault cannot be tolerated in our community." The judge nodded, glancing at her papers. "Bail is set at $50,000. A phone chimed. Then another. Suddenly, devices throughout the courtroom began buzzing and pinging with notifications. The bailiff's phone lit up in his pocket. Even the judge's clerk glanced down at her screen. "Your Honor," Calvin's defender said suddenly, his own phone in hand, "I believe there's evidence the court needs to see immediately." On screens across the courtroom, Dana Mercer's face appeared in a breaking news segment. Channel 8 has obtained exclusive footage of what appears to be police brutality at Maybelle's diner last night, she said gravely. The clip began playing, shaky but clear enough to show Pike slapping Calvin's coffee away, then striking him without provocation. The footage cut off before showing the worst of the beating. But it was enough. A murmur rippled through the courtroom like wind through dry leaves. The judge's face tightened. She looked from the video to Pike, who had gone very still, and back again. For one electrifying moment, the power in the room shifted. Emily felt a surge of hope bubble up in her chest. Judge Morris cleared her throat. "In light of this, new information. Bail is reduced to $5,000. The defendant is to be released for immediate medical treatment." Shaw's face darkened. Pike's jaw worked silently, chewing on words he couldn't say. The gavel came down. Court adjourned until full review. Outside the courthouse steps, as Calvin was helped toward a waiting ambulance, a sleek black car pulled up. Councilman Douglas Mercer emerged, straightening his tie. News vans were already gathering, reporters sensing blood in the water. Mercer stepped directly to the cameras, his expression grave but confident. "What we're seeing is deeply troubling, not because of police actions, but because of the apparent technological manipulation of evidence. This appears to be a deepfake video released just weeks before my re-election campaign launches." Emily, watching from the courthouse door, felt her stomach drop. "We will investigate fully," Mercer continued smoothly, "but we cannot allow political attacks on our brave law enforcement officers based on doctored footage. This reeks of outside interference." Within hours, social media flooded with conflicting accounts. New witnesses emerged, claiming Calvin had been drunk, aggressive. Local news channels friendly to Mercer began questioning the video's authenticity. The truth had surfaced, but the machine grinding against it was stronger than anyone expected. As paramedics helped Calvin into the ambulance, Pike stood watching from the courthouse steps, his face a mask of controlled fury. He leaned close to Tully, whispering between clenched teeth, "This isn't over. Not by a long shot. We finish what we started. Doctor..." Naomi Bell snapped off her gloves and stepped back from the examination table where Calvin Rhodes sat. Her face was a careful mask of professionalism, but her eyes burned with contained anger. 3 cracked ribs on the left side. facial contusions with significant swelling around the orbital socket, internal bruising consistent with repeated blunt force trauma, possible hairline fracture of the right wrist. She spoke clearly, documenting each injury in her tablet while a nurse photographed the injuries. Calvin winced as he slowly pulled his hospital gown back into place. Every movement sent fresh waves of pain radiating through his torso. Emily and Maybelle sat in plastic chairs against the wall, their faces drawn with worry and exhaustion. This wasn't a scuffle, Dr. Bell continued, looking Calvin in the eye. This was a sustained assault. The pattern of injury shows defensive wounds. You were protecting yourself, not attacking. Calvin nodded slightly. I appreciate your thoroughness, Doctor. I've treated injuries from police encounters before, Dr. Bell said quietly. But this, she shook her head. This goes beyond excessive force. Through the hospital room's window, they could see reporters gathering in the parking lot below. The story was growing. Dana Mercer's broadcast had sparked interest from larger stations. Emily leaned forward in her chair. How long will he need to stay? At least overnight for observation, Dr. Bell answered. Those rib injuries concern me. At his age, we need to monitor for respiratory complications. The door opened, and a tall black man in a crisp suit entered. He carried a leather briefcase and moved with purpose. Mr. Rhodes, I'm Adrian Wells, civil rights attorney. He extended his hand carefully to avoid causing Calvin more pain. I've reviewed the preliminary evidence and would like to offer my services immediately. No payment required up front. Calvin studied the man's face. You work fast, Mr. Wells. Police brutality cases demand speed, Wells replied. Evidence has a way of vanishing when departments feel threatened. Maybelle stood up. That's already happening. Someone tried to burn part of my diner last night. Wells nodded grimly. More reason we need to document everything now. For a brief moment, the room hummed with cautious hope. The video was spreading. A skilled attorney had arrived. Calvin was receiving proper medical care and documentation. It felt like momentum was building toward justice. That feeling lasted exactly 7 minutes. A heavy knock rattled the door, and a man in an ill-fitting gray suit entered, flanked by a uniformed deputy. He flashed a county investigator badge. Calvin Rhodes, I'm Investigator Harris. I have a warrant to search your belongings and question you regarding a classified security breach. Wells stepped forward. My client has just been treated for serious injuries. Any questioning will happen with me present, and only after he's medically cleared. Harris smiled thinly. This isn't about his incident at the diner. This concerns national security. A classified file from Mr. Rhodes's advisory work has gone missing. We have reason to believe he may have compromised sensitive information. Calvin's face remained impassive, but his eyes hardened. That's a lie. Is it? Harris produced a folder. We have a sworn statement from a White House security officer indicating possible document mishandling during your last advisory visit. Wells took the warrant, examining it carefully. This is conveniently timed, and signed by Judge Morris, the same judge from this morning's hearing. Outside in the hallway, Emily's phone buzzed. She glanced down to see a notification. Her video had been removed for copyright violation from 3 different platforms. She showed it to Maybelle, whose face drained of color. The hospital room door burst open again. Luis stumbled in, breathing hard. They're coming for me. Someone said I violated probation from that old parking ticket thing. 2 deputies appeared behind him, grabbing his arms. Luis Herrera, you're under arrest for violation of probation. This is witness intimidation, Maybelle shouted, moving toward them. One deputy placed his hand on his holster. Ma'am, step back now. I'm not changing my story, Luis called as they dragged him away. I saw what they did. Maybelle trembled, suddenly looking older and very afraid. The easy confidence of the diner owner had evaporated. She sank back into her chair. On the television mounted in the corner of the room, Councilman Mercer appeared at a press conference, looking solemn. The edited video being circulated does not show the full context. Officer Pike and Officer Tully have been reassigned to administrative duties while we conduct a thorough and transparent investigation. Wells muted the TV. Administrative duties. Not suspended. Not on leave. They're free to keep intimidating witnesses, Emily whispered. Calvin eased himself higher on the bed, grimacing through pain. This was never just about two violent deputies, he said quietly. Pike and Tully are symptoms. The disease is deeper. Politicians protecting dirty cops because my survival threatens their careers. Dr. Bell checked Calvin's vitals again, concern etched on her face. Your blood pressure is rising. You need rest. What he needs is protection, Wells said, pulling out his phone. I'm calling in some federal connections of my own. Before he could dial, the door opened once more. Two county deputies entered, different from the ones who'd taken Louise. Mr. Rhodes, the taller one said, producing a document, we have a revised arrest order. You'll be remanded to county custody immediately. The hospital room buzzed with tension as one deputy secured Calvin's wrist to the metal bed rail. The cuff clicked shut with a finality that made Emily flinch. His other hand remained free, but only because of the IV line pumping fluids into his battered body. This is completely unnecessary, Dr. Bell protested, her white coat fluttering as she moved between the deputies and her patient. Mr. Rhodes is in no condition to be transported. He has 3 cracked ribs, facial fractures, and possible internal bleeding we're still monitoring. The deputy shrugged. Orders are orders, ma'am. He's considered a flight risk. Calvin, still dressed in the thin hospital gown that did nothing to hide the dark bruises spreading across his arms, met the deputy's eyes with quiet dignity. Hard to flee when you can barely stand, he said, his voice low but steady. Outside the window, news vans clustered at the hospital entrance. Reporters held microphones aloft, catching only glimpses of the scene unfolding on the 3rd floor. The story was spreading, but so were the lies. Emily pushed past the second deputy and into the hallway where Adrian Wells was already on his phone, pacing with fierce energy. Yes, Judge Colton, it's clearly retaliatory, Wells said, his voice tight with controlled rage. They're creating fictional security charges to discredit a witness to police brutality. He paused, listening. 1 hour? My client could be back in county custody by then. Another pause. I understand. Thank you, Your Honor. Emily grabbed Wells's arm as he ended the call. What's happening? Judge Colton will hear our emergency motion, but not for another hour, Wells said, running a hand over his face. They're trying to get Calvin back to county jail before federal authorities can intervene. On a waiting room television nearby, Councilman Mercer's face filled the screen. He stood at a podium, looking appropriately grave. While I cannot discuss the details of an ongoing investigation, Mercer said, his voice dripping with false concern, I can confirm that Calvin Rhodes had access to sensitive information regarding veterans' benefits and personal data. The fact that classified material may have been compromised is deeply troubling. Emily's hands balled into fists. He's lying! They're trying to make people afraid instead of angry. Fear always works better than truth, Wells said grimly, especially when it involves national security. Back in the room, Calvin motioned Emily closer with his free hand. His face was pale beneath the bandages, but his eyes remained sharp. Listen carefully, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. This isn't random. I've spent the last year reviewing confidential complaints from veterans and elderly black residents in Mercer's district. pattern of targeted traffic stops, property seizures, intimidation. Emily's eyes widened. That's why you were here? In Bryer County? Calvin nodded slightly, wincing at the movement. I visit my wife's grave every month, but this time I was also meeting with 3 veterans who filed complaints. Pike and Tully may have targeted me by chance at the diner, but Mercer recognized my name the moment Shaw called him. You knew about him already, Emily realized. Federal task force has been quietly investigating procurement fraud and civil rights violations here for months, Calvin confirmed. The money trail leads straight to Mercer. Building contracts, private prison kickbacks, selective enforcement in certain neighborhoods. The deputy stepped closer. That's enough talking. Calvin ignored him. Pike and Tully are just street-level muscle, he continued. They're the fists. Mercer's the brain. The whole system runs on intimidation, selective arrests, witness silencing. Maybelle, who had been silent until now, suddenly straightened her shoulders. That explains why they came after my diner so fast. And Luis. Wells returned, slipping his phone into his pocket. Transport van is already downstairs. They're not waiting. Then neither am I, Emily said, pulling out her phone and starting a live stream. I'm documenting everything. The deputy reached for her phone. You can't record in here. Actually, she can, Wells countered. There's no law against recording in a hospital hallway when no medical procedures are being performed. Dr. Bell appeared in the doorway, frustration evident on her face. They're insisting on moving him now. I've documented my medical objections. 2 orderlies arrived with a wheelchair. With surprising gentleness, they helped Calvin from the bed to the chair, unhooking the handcuff from the rail, only to reattach it to the wheelchair's metal frame. Calvin's face tightened with pain, but he made no sound. Emily kept her phone steady, narrating quietly. They're taking him despite medical advice. This is Calvin Rhodes, beaten by police last night at Maybelle's diner, now being arrested again on what his lawyer calls fabricated charges. The small procession moved toward the elevator. 2 deputies, Calvin in the wheelchair, pushed by an orderly, followed by Wells, Emily, and Maybelle. The live stream counter ticked upward. 12 viewers, 28, 53. As the elevator doors opened on the ground floor, Emily's phone pinged with a message from Dana. Keep broadcasting. We're picking up your feed. They wheeled Calvin through the back corridor toward the loading dock where prisoner transports arrived. Through the windows, Emily could see the county sheriff's van waiting, its engine running. Just as they reached the exit doors, 3 black SUVs with government plates turned sharply into the hospital entrance, cutting off the sheriff's van. Men and women in dark suits emerged, moving with purpose. The lead deputy's radio crackled. All units, stand down. Federal hold order in effect. The hospital lobby froze like a paused movie. Federal agents in dark suits and severe expressions fanned out across the entrance, blocking the path to the county transport van. One woman with close-cropped gray hair stepped forward, badge already extended. Special Agent Harris, Department of Justice Civil Rights Division, she announced, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. This is an emergency federal intervention. These papers halt any transfer of Calvin Rhodes pending investigation. The county deputies exchanged nervous glances. The lead deputy, a burly man with a crew cut, examined the papers with trembling fingers. These seem to be in order, but I need to call the sheriff, he mumbled. Call whoever you want, Agent Harris replied. But Mr. Rhodes stays here under federal protection starting now. Emily kept her live stream running, capturing every word. Her phone vibrated with notifications as viewers poured in by the hundreds. Dana's news station had picked up the feed, broadcasting the confrontation across 3 counties. Adrian Wells stepped forward, straightening his tie. As Mr. Rhodes' attorney, I'll need copies of those papers. Of course, Agent Harris handed them over, while two other agents positioned themselves on either side of Calvin's wheelchair. Dr. Bell approached the federal team. "I have his complete medical records ready. The injuries are consistent with repeated strikes to the head, ribs, and back, far beyond any force that could be justified for restraint." "Thank you, doctor," said a tall man from the federal team. "We'll need your sworn statement as well." Within minutes, Mercer's office had been notified. Emily watched as the news rippled through the hospital. A nurse whispered to an orderly who promptly made a call. Security guards shifted uncomfortably. The machinery of local power was suddenly grinding its gears, unsure how to proceed now that federal eyes were watching. Calvin sat quietly in his wheelchair, eyes clear despite the pain medication. "I told you they'd come," he said softly to Emily. "The system bends toward justice eventually, if you push hard enough." Agent Harris knelt beside Calvin. "Mr. Rhodes, we're setting up a secure room upstairs where you can recover under federal protection. Your testimony will be critical." Calvin nodded. "I've been keeping notes since the first complaint landed on my desk 6 months ago." As the federal team prepared to move Calvin back upstairs, the hospital doors burst open. Sergeant Arnett entered, looking haggard and nervous. He carried a manila envelope clutched tightly against his chest. "I need to speak with whoever's in charge," he said, eyes darting around the lobby. When Agent Harris identified herself, Arnett lowered his voice. "I brought the real booking log. Chief Shaw ordered it replaced this morning, but I kept the original." Adrian accepted the envelope, quickly scanning its contents. "This shows Shaw explicitly ordered medical care denied despite documented injuries," he said, voice tight with controlled anger. "That's deliberate indifference to medical needs, a clear constitutional violation." Emily touched Arnett's arm. "Why are you doing this?" The sergeant looked down. "Been watching too long, telling myself it wasn't my problem. But last night," he shook his head, "I couldn't sleep knowing what they did to him." Back upstairs in a newly secured room, Calvin rested while Adrian built a timeline on his laptop. Emily sat nearby, uploading her videos to cloud storage, where they couldn't be deleted. "I need to see Luis," she said suddenly. "He's all alone in there." Adrian nodded. "I'll arrange it. The federal presence changes things. The county can't block attorney visits now." 2 hours later, Emily sat across from Luis in the county jail visitor room. His face was tired, his shoulders slumped. "They keep saying I'll get 5 years if I don't change my story," Luis whispered. "That I didn't see what I saw." Emily leaned forward. "The feds are here now, Luis. The whole thing is breaking open. Was it the same man you saw behind the diner? The one from Mercer's campaign?" Luis nodded slowly. "Marco Delgado. Works security for Mercer's events, but he does the dirty work too. I recognized him right away." "We need you to hold on just a little longer," Emily said, reaching across to touch his hand. Dana's news team found payment records. Mercer's campaign paid shell companies that got county contracts. The same companies hired Pike and Tully for private security. "It's all connected," Luis said, understanding dawning on his face. "Always was," Emily replied. By evening, Dana's special report aired across the state. It laid bare the skeleton of corruption, staged aggressive policing in certain neighborhoods, contracts steered to donors, officers paid to intimidate political opponents. Calvin's beating wasn't random. It was the system working as designed, until it targeted someone who could fight back. Mercer appeared on camera, denying everything with practiced outrage. "These are baseless accusations. I've called a town hall tomorrow night to address these ridiculous claims directly with my constituents." When Emily returned to the hospital, she found Calvin sitting up, watching the same broadcast. "He's cornered," Calvin observed. "That town hall is his last chance to spin this his way." "You need to rest," Emily urged. "Let the feds handle him." Calvin shook his head. "I'll be there tomorrow night." Adrian looked up from his notes. "That's not advisable. Your injuries. I'll be there, Calvin repeated firmly. Cowards grow bold when victims stay hidden. I need to look him in the eye while he lies. Emily understood then why Calvin had survived decades in intelligence work. His quiet strength wasn't passive. It was purposeful. He knew exactly when to stand and be counted. Then we'll all go, she said. Every witness, every victim. Calvin smiled slightly, wincing at the pull on his split lip. Tomorrow night, then. Let's see how brave Councilman Mercer is when he has to face the people he's been stepping on. The Bryan County Civic Hall buzzed with tension as hundreds packed the rows of folding chairs. News cameras lined the back wall. People stood 3 deep along the sides, their faces tight with anger or curiosity. Federal agents in plain clothes scattered throughout, their watchful eyes missing nothing. Councilman Douglas Mercer stood at the podium looking confident in his tailored Navy suit, American flag pin gleaming on his lapel. His practiced smile never reached his eyes as he shuffled papers and tapped the microphone. Testing, 1, 2, he said, voice smooth as honey. Folks, thank you for coming out tonight. The double doors at the back of the hall swung open. A hush fell over the crowd. Calvin Rhodes entered, leaning heavily on a wooden cane. His face still bore the marks of brutality, the purple bruise spreading across his cheekbone, the butterfly bandages holding together the gash above his eye. He moved with the careful precision of a man whose ribs were wrapped tight beneath his button-down shirt. Emily Dawson walked beside him, her hand hovering near his elbow, ready to steady him if needed. Adrian Wells followed close behind, carrying a leather portfolio. The walk down the center aisle seemed endless. Every eye tracked Calvin's painful progress. Some people whispered. Others looked away, ashamed. Mercer's smile tightened. Ah, Mr. Rhodes has decided to join us. How theatrical. Calvin didn't acknowledge the barb. He simply continued his deliberate journey to the front row, where an empty seat waited. Each step was a small victory over pain. When Calvin finally sat down, Mercer cleared his throat and launched into his prepared speech. Good citizens of Bryan County, we face a crisis manufactured by outside agitators and political opportunists. Law enforcement is under attack. Our way of life is under attack. His voice rose with practiced emotion. What happened at Maybell's Diner was unfortunate, but it's being exploited by those with an agenda. In the front row, Officers Pike and Tully sat straight-backed in their dress uniforms. Pike smirked when Mercer's eyes briefly met his. Mr. Rhodes resisted lawful commands from officers responding to reports of suspicious activity, Mercer continued. When officers attempted to secure the situation, he became combative. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone shouted, "That's a lie!" Mercer raised his hands. "Please, let's be civil. These officers put their lives on the line every day. They deserve the benefit of the doubt, not trial by social media." Adrian rose to his feet. "My client would like to address these false claims." Mercer's smile disappeared. "This isn't a courtroom, Counselor." "No," Adrian replied. "It's worse. It's a public lynching of a man's character after your officers already tried to beat him to death." The room erupted. Mercer banged his gavel while his aide whispered urgently in his ear. Finally, he gestured to the microphone stand set up for audience questions. "Fine. Mr. Rhodes can have his say." Calvin stood with painful slowness. Emily helped him to the microphone. The room fell silent. "My name is Calvin Rhodes," he began, his voice steady despite the visible pain. 30 years Army intelligence, 20 years as a federal advisor on Veterans Affairs. He paused, drawing a careful breath around his broken ribs. "I was drinking coffee in a diner when these officers decided I didn't belong there." Pike shifted uncomfortably, as Calvin turned to face him directly. "Officer Pike struck me first. a blow to the face that fractured my orbital bone. Calvin touched the swollen area around his eye. Officer Tully drove his knee into my back, cracking 3 ribs. His words were measured, clinical. They denied me medical care for 14 hours. Every breath still hurts. The silence in the room was complete. I didn't resist. I didn't fight. I asked for my rights and received this. Calvin gestured to his injured body. Not because I committed any crime, but because men like these have been allowed to operate without consequence for too long. Mercer stepped forward. That's your version, Mr. Rhodes. Officer Pike has stated you fell during lawful restraint. I fell? Calvin interrupted, his composure cracking for the first time. Is that what you call being thrown to the floor and beaten while customers watched? Is that what you call having my head slammed into tile? Pike stood up, face reddening. You resisted arrest. You were. I was eating pie, Calvin said flatly. The crime was sitting, while black, in a diner where you didn't want to see me. Emily stepped to the microphone next. I was there. I saw everything. Her voice shook, but grew stronger with each word. They attacked him without provocation. When we tried to get the security footage, someone set fire to the diner's back room. They slashed my tires. They threatened all of us. From the side entrance, 2 federal agents escorted Luis Herrera into the hall. Whispers erupted as he approached the microphone. I saw Marco Delgado behind the diner that night, Luis stated clearly. He works security for Councilman Mercer's campaigns. He was the one who cut the camera wires and started the fire. Mercer's face flushed dark red. This is absurd. You can't believe this ex-con. We found the payment records, Adrian cut in. Shell companies that received county contracts paid both Pike and Tully for security services. Those same companies received campaign funds from your election committee. The crowd's murmurs grew louder. Mercer gripped the podium. You're all being manipulated by this man, Mercer snarled, pointing at Calvin. An old man desperate for importance, inventing conspiracy theories now that his time is past. The cruelty hung in the air. Calvin didn't flinch, but the room did. Even some of Mercer's supporters shifted uncomfortably. From the back of the room, Dana stepped forward, tablet in hand. She nodded to her crew. Actually, Councilman, she called out, we've recovered something you should see. The projector screen behind Mercer flickered to life. The diner's security footage began to play. The projector illuminated the darkened hall with crystal-clear footage from Maybell's diner. Unlike the grainy, partial clip that had circulated earlier, this was the complete security backup. Sharp, unedited, and devastating in its clarity. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Pike approached Calvin at the counter. Every moment played out in brutal detail. Pike slapping Calvin's coffee away, Tully yanking the elderly man from his stool before he could even respond. Both officers forcing him to the ground, while Calvin's hands remained open, never forming fists. Gasps filled the room when Pike struck Calvin in the face. The camera captured Maybell's desperate pleas. Please, stop! He's done nothing wrong! The officers ignored her, their faces twisted with cruel satisfaction as they continued the assault. Then came the moment that made the entire hall go still. Pike leaned close to Calvin's bloodied face and sneered. No one important is coming for a man like you. No one that matters gives a care. The footage froze on Pike's contemptuous expression. Dana stepped forward into the silence. This is the unedited security footage that someone tried to destroy. The timestamp matches Mr. Rhodes's statement exactly. Mercer stood frozen at the podium, his polished political mask completely shattered. He fumbled for words as the room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. This could be altered. We need proper verification. Federal verification is already complete, a stern voice announced from the back. Two agents in dark suits moved through the parting crowd. The lead agent held up his credentials. Special Agent Marcus Townsend, Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. This investigation has been ongoing for 6 months. Adrian Wells rose to stand beside Calvin. "Your Honor," he addressed the county judge, who sat ashen-faced in the front row, "I present into public record the booking log that Sergeant Arnett preserved, showing Chief Shaw's direct order to deny Mr. Rhodes medical treatment for 14 hours. The judge took the document with trembling hands as Adrian continued. "I also submit, Dr. Naomi Bell's medical assessment documenting injuries consistent with excessive force and deliberate harm, not with falling during lawful restraint, as Officer Pike claimed." Dr. Bell stood from her seat. "The pattern of injuries could only have come from repeated, intentional strikes. Mr. Rhodes suffered 3 cracked ribs, facial fractures, and internal bruising that could have been fatal at his age." The second federal agent stepped forward, opening a folder. "We've uncovered financial records showing illegal payments to both officers through shell companies receiving county contracts. Those same companies received $250,000 in campaign funds from Councilman Mercer's election committee." Mercer lunged for the microphone. "This is a political witch hunt. You can't—" "We can, and we have," Agent Townsend interrupted. "2 state-level operatives from your donor network, James Whitman and Terrence Fowler, have already been named in sealed federal warrants. This corruption extends far beyond Bryan County." At the edge of the crowd, Chief Shaw edged toward a side exit. A uniformed state trooper stepped in front of the door, blocking his escape. "Going somewhere, Chief?" The crowd's attention swung back to the front when Pike suddenly lunged from his seat, face contorted with rage. "You did this!" he shouted, charging directly at Calvin. Tully moved a split second later, following his partner's lead as always. The crowd scattered in panic as the 2 officers rushed forward. Calvin didn't flinch. He stood his ground, leaning on his cane, eyes locked on the men who had brutalized him. Before they could reach him, federal agents and state troopers tackled both men to the ground. The takedown was swift and professional, a stark contrast to the violence Pike and Tully had inflicted on an innocent man. Handcuffs clicked loudly in the stunned silence. "Officer Nolan Pike, Officer Brent Tully, you're under arrest for civil rights violations, assault, filing false reports, and obstruction of justice," Agent Townsend announced, his voice echoing through the hall. Mercer tried to back away from the podium, but another agent approached with handcuffs ready. "Douglas Mercer, you're under arrest for conspiracy, witness tampering, and misuse of public funds." As the cuffs locked around Mercer's wrists, the facade of power that had protected these men for years crumbled completely. The very public that had feared them watched them fall. Calvin Rhodes remained standing. His body was still wounded, his breathing careful around damaged ribs, but his dignity was intact. He had faced the machine that tried to crush him and remained unbowed. The room erupted, first in shocked whispers, then in a wave of voices as the community witnessed justice delivered in real time. Maybelle rushed to Calvin's side, tears streaming down her face. Emily and Luis embraced, their courage finally vindicated. In that moment, with the corrupt officials being led away in handcuffs, the power dynamic that had ruled Bryan County for years was shattered. Not in shadows, but in the full light of public witness, exactly where Pike and Tully had once performed their unchecked authority. Near midnight, Maybelle's diner reopened, not with its usual clatter of dishes and murmur of customers, but with a hushed reverence. The violent scene that had played out days earlier had been erased as much as possible. The broken glass was swept away, though memories remained sharp as shards. One window stood boarded up, a temporary bandage on the building that matched the healing bruises on Calvin's face. The counter stool, the one where it had all started, had been wiped clean of blood and set upright again, waiting. Maybelle herself unlocked the door, letting in Emily, Luis, Dana, Adrian, and finally, Calvin. He moved slowly, his ribs still heavily taped beneath his fresh button-down shirt. His cane tapped gently across the tile floor that had days ago held his bloodied body. "It's strange," Calvin said, pausing to look around the quiet space. "A place can hold violence in its walls. And healing, too," Maybelle answered, flipping on the lights. She wore her best apron, the one saved for Sundays. "I wasn't sure I could ever open these doors again." Luis nodded, his eyes traveling to the spot by the register where he'd watched Pike slam Calvin's head against the counter. "I kept seeing it happen. Over and over," he admitted. "Even in my cell." Emily touched his arm. "But they can't hurt anyone anymore." The news had spread fast after the town hall. Pike and Tully were behind bars, denied bail as flight risks. Their booking photos showed rage replaced by fear, the kind they had inflicted on others for years. Chief Shaw faced multiple federal counts after agents discovered a hidden drive with years of covered-up complaints against his department. And Douglas Mercer, the man who had built a political career on fear and corruption, was photographed being escorted from his office in handcuffs. Dana set her notebook on the counter. "The governor is distancing himself from Mercer's entire network. 3 state officials resigned this afternoon. They're calling it the Bryan County Cleanup." "It's bigger than Bryan County," Calvin said quietly. "Always was." Adrian Wells nodded, loosening his tie. "The Justice Department is expanding the investigation to 3 neighboring counties." This wasn't isolated. They settled into a booth, Maybelle bringing coffee without being asked. Her hands trembled slightly, but not from fear this time, from relief. The weight of years of looking the other way, of survival through silence, had lifted from her shoulders. "I feel like I should apologize," she said to Calvin, "for not doing something sooner that night." Calvin shook his head. "You did what was right when it counted most. We all have moments when fear wins. What matters is what comes after." Luis looked down at his hands. "When they came for me on that probation violation, I almost broke. Almost said whatever they wanted." "But you didn't," Emily reminded him. "You stood strong." The coffee steamed in their cups as Maybelle brought out a fresh pie. Not because anyone was hungry, but because breaking bread together was how communities had always healed wounds. Calvin's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and excused himself to take the call in the corner. The others watched as he listened intently, his posture straightening despite the pain it surely caused him. When he returned, his expression was solemn but determined. "That was Senator Gaines," he said. "They want me to head a special advisory committee on civil rights protections for elderly and veteran populations. Congressional hearings will start next month." Emily's eyes widened. "That's incredible, Calvin." He shook his head slightly. "It's necessary. What happened here happens everywhere, just not always with cameras rolling and witnesses brave enough to speak." He looked at Emily and Luis. "What you both did, that's rarer than it should be." "Will you take it?" Dana asked. Calvin nodded slowly. "Not for the title. Not to be important." He looked around the diner, at the counter where his dignity had been assaulted. "So Bryan County never happens to anyone else." They talked for hours, piecing together their individual perspectives of what had happened. How Emily had hidden her phone just in time. How Luis had recognized the maintenance man as Mercer's fixer. How Maybelle had saved a backup key because she'd seen too many accidents before. How Calvin had made that crucial call, knowing exactly who would answer. As their voices filled the space, the diner transformed. The site of violence became a place of testimony, of truth. Around 4 in the morning, the others began to leave. Luis headed home to his children, who had waited too long for their father. Adrian departed with files for the civil suits already being prepared. Dana left to file her latest story before deadline. Only Calvin remained, moving back to the counterstool that had started it all. Maybelle refilled his cup without asking. "On the house," she said. "Forever." Calvin smiled, the gesture still painful across his bruised face. "I'll still tip." Maybelle retreated to the kitchen, leaving Calvin alone with his thoughts and his coffee. Through the window, the first pale light of dawn touched the glass, filling the diner with a gentle glow. For the first time since the beating, the room felt different. The tension that had hung in the air like smoke had cleared. The corner where he had been struck, the floor where he had bled, the counter where his dignity had been attacked, all reclaimed now. Justice had entered Maybelle's diner and decided to stay. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.